I'm Claire Whitmore, 31 years old, and on the night my family decided my future for me, I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't even argue. I sat at the table where I'd eaten countless Sunday dinners, listening as my father leaned back in his chair and declared, "She'll pay everything." My mother kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, saying nothing. My brother avoided my eyes, sipping soda as if this were a casual gathering. And in that silence, something shifted inside me, a truth I could no longer deny. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe if you've ever carried more weight than anyone around you seem to notice. I grew up in Ohio, in a modest neighborhood where my parents preached about pulling together as a family. My dad worked long shifts in his repair shop, grease on his hands, and a stubborn pride in his voice. My mom stayed home keeping the house running and making sure meals were on the table. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were close-knit, steady, and ordinary. I believed in that image for a long time, and maybe that's why I kept stepping into the role they quietly built for me. From an early age, I was the responsible one. I studied hard-earned scholarships and took my first job before most of my friends had even thought about work. I was proud of that, but it also became the reason my family leaned on me. My brother Brian was different. Charming, but reckless, he floated from one plan to another, chasing quick opportunities that always seemed to fall apart. And when they did, I was the one who patched things together, the one my parents praised for her strength while pressing another burden into my hands. When I finished college, I should have gone on to graduate school. Instead, I stayed close to home helping pay for my father's hospital stay when his insurance didn't cover enough. Later, I co-signed a loan for Brian when his credit failed him. At first, these decisions felt like acts of love, natural extensions of family loyalty. But as the years went on, each new request left me more drained, and each sacrifice disappeared into silence. No one ever asked how I was managing or what I had to put aside to make their lives easier. I tried to believe things would change once we were older, once the emergencies slowed down. But life doesn't pause just because you need rest. I poured my time into building a career, long hours at a desk, promotions, earned by grit alone, while my family seemed to notice only when it meant I had more to give. The more I achieved, the less visible I became, at least as a daughter. To them, I was the fallback, the steady hand, the one who never said no. Over time, the warmth in their voices cooled when I stopped volunteering to cover every expense. The texts came less often and the conversations grew thinner. Still, I kept telling myself that family would always stand by each other even when I felt myself pulling further away. That illusion began to crack the day my parents asked for a family meeting. We had never held one before, and the moment I heard those words, I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a decision made without me. I walked into that room expecting a difficult night. What I didn't expect was how clearly the mask would fall away. My father didn't hesitate. My mother didn't protest, and my brother sat waiting like he already knew the outcome. The words were simple, almost casual, but they carried the weight of years. "She'll pay everything." In that instant, I realized the truth I had been trying not to face. To them, I wasn't Claire, the daughter they raised. I was Claire, the provider. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I would play that part again. The silence after my father's words lingered heavier than the meal still cooling on the table. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood as I stood, but no one moved to stop me. My mother pressed her lips together, her hands clasped, like she was bracing for something, yet she never spoke. Brian leaned back with the faintest sigh, as though this outcome had been rehearsed long before I walked through the door. Without answering, I smoothed the front of my coat and stepped away, the familiar living room suddenly foreign under the dim light of the chandelier. I drove without direction, the road carrying me past neighborhoods I had once known well. The houses blurred by as I replayed every moment that had led to this night. When my father was laid up from surgery years ago, I had written the checks that saved the house from foreclosure. When Brian's credit collapsed after another failed investment, it was my name that kept him in a car. When the roof leaked during a heavy storm, I handed over my savings without hesitation. Each time, they said the same words, "We're lucky to have you, Claire." I used to believe them, but the gratitude always faded, replaced by another call, another crisis, another need only I was expected to fill. They never asked how much it cost me to step in. They never noticed when I stopped smiling at Sunday dinners or when I quietly skipped holidays to avoid more conversations about money. My accomplishments at work, the promotions and late nights spent in fluorescent light, were brushed aside with a shrug. "Well, you've always had it easier," my brother once said, as if stability had been handed to me rather than built through years of effort. Somewhere along the way, I learned not to argue. I told myself that one day things would even out, that when the emergencies slowed, I could finally rest. But they never slowed. I carried their weight quietly, saving what little I could, building a life they never seemed to see. And then little by little I began to change. It started small. I stopped announcing pay raises over dinner. I shifted my savings to a separate account at a bank across town. I set alerts on my credit watching for any sign my name had been borrowed again. I said nothing, but I prepared. When I no longer volunteered money, the calls grew less frequent. When I didn't offer to cover rent, the cheerful texts dried up. The moment I stopped being useful, I became invisible. That realization stung more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't the good daughter anymore. I was simply the daughter who stopped giving. And in our family, that meant I was dangerous. The first sign came in a voicemail from my mother. "Hey, honey, call us when you get a second. We need to talk about something." Her voice tried to sound casual, but the hesitation clung to every word. A few days later, Brian sent a text. "You coming to dinner Sunday? We've got some stuff to run by you." He had never used that phrase before. My family never ran things by me. They decided they expected, and I complied. Until I didn't. Suspicion pressed at me, so I did what had become routine. I checked my credit monitoring, no unusual activity. I pulled the deed to my condo still under my name. Then I reached for the binder I kept tucked behind cleaning supplies under the sink. Color-coded tabs lined its edges neat and precise. Bank statements, transfer records, every dollar I had given over the years laid out in ink. On the final page, a spreadsheet titled "Family Contributions Not Returned." Line after line stretched down the page Brian's tuition shortfall, Mom's dental implants, Dad's medical bills, a list of emergencies, some never even explained. The total ran high, far higher than I wanted to face in that moment. Closing the folder felt like shutting a door. I held it a long time before sliding it back into its place, my fingers lingering on the worn edge. That file was my memory, my evidence, my truth. 2 days later, the phone rang. My father's voice was steady, almost too calm. "Claire, we're having a family meeting on Sunday after dinner. Just us. Nothing serious. We just want to talk through a few things. We had never held family meetings. We didn't talk through problems. We let them sit in silence, covered over with small talk, until they rotted unseen." His invitation told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a request. It was a plan already set in motion. For a long while, I said nothing, listening to the breath on the other end. Finally, he added, "We'll keep it short." I agreed, but I knew better than to walk in unprepared. That Sunday, I arrived with a neutral smile and a blank notebook tucked in my bag. The table was set with roast chicken, and Brian drank soda straight from the can, leaning back like someone waiting for a performance to start. My father wore his favorite flannel, the one I remembered from childhood, when I still believed he could fix anything. Conversation drifted from traffic to neighbors' cars, but the pauses stretched too long, like everyone was stalling for time. Then my father cleared his throat. My mother folded her hands tighter. Brian leaned back farther. "Your brother's in a difficult situation," my father began. "A lawsuit, some miscalculations. The details aren't important, but the amount is significant." He never met my eyes. "It's 210. Brian added his tone flat, like he was reading a number off a receipt. "I have 30 days before it goes to court." I sat still, the hum of the refrigerator louder than his words. "We've talked it over," my mother said quickly, her voice thinner now. "And we think the best solution is for you to help. Just until Brian can get back on his feet." The air felt cold, despite the heat from the oven. My father leaned back in his chair, his voice steady, rehearsed. "She'll pay everything. Not could, not maybe. Will." The words fell into me like a stone into still water, rippling through every memory I had carried alone. In that moment, I understood what had always been true, but never spoken aloud. I wasn't sitting there as Claire, their daughter. I was their plan, their provider, the answer to a problem they refused to face themselves. And for the first time, I felt no obligation to nod, no urge to reach for my checkbook. Instead, I simply looked at each of them and for once saw them clearly. I left my parents' house that night with the words still echoing in my ears. The phrase was short, but it carried years of history, a reminder of how often I had been the one expected to step in. The drive stretched long headlights carving the dark road ahead while my phone buzzed with unanswered calls. I didn't have the energy to reply. Instead, I let the silence surround me, broken only by the hum of the tires beneath me. When I finally pulled into my apartment, the air felt heavy. I passed the framed photo of us that hung in the hallway, the four of us smiling on a beach years ago. For a moment I studied it, trying to recall what it felt like to laugh without tension clinging to every family moment. I walked past without taking it down, though a part of me wanted to. The freezer still held casseroles I had made in advance for work nights, when exhaustion left me too drained to cook. I opened the door, then shut it again without eating. The messages kept arriving. My mother's voice sounded tight over the phone, asking where I had gone. My father wrote that we needed to finish the conversation. Brian's text was sharper, questioning if I was really going to walk away. I set the phone face down, letting the screen light up without answering. The quiet pressed in, but it wasn't harsh. It was clean, the kind that follows a fire when the flames finally burn themselves out. That night, I logged into every account I had. I checked balances, froze transfers, and set new passwords with questions only I could answer. The old joint account I had once opened for my mother's bills held only a few $100s. I closed it. Every tie I cut loosened something inside me. By morning, I had packed a suitcase with just the essentials and left the couch and furniture behind. At sunrise, I was checked into a month-to-month rental across the state line. The loft was bare but quiet, a blank canvas that felt more like mine than any place had in years. The calls shifted as the week passed. At first, they were filled with guilt reminders that I had been raised better, that family pulled together. Then came pleas that grew sharper with each unanswered message. "Your brother is in trouble," my mother wrote. "This isn't how family works." The last message cut through with a truth they hadn't admitted before. "We don't have anyone else." Reading it, I understood more than I ever had. One evening, an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. I answered without thinking. Claire Bryan's voice came through, no apology, no greeting, just my name. I stayed quiet, waiting. "Look, I get it, you're mad," he said, But this isn't just about you, okay? This is about family. His words carried the same weight I had heard before, that net meant to hold me in place. You didn't even say anything, he went on. You just walked out. No, I answered. I walked away. There's a difference. You could have said something. You weren't listening, I cut in. None of you were. You had already decided what my answer would be. You just wanted me there to nod and write the check. The line went quiet static, filling the space. I'm going to lose everything, he finally said, his voice smaller now. The apartment. The car may be even worse. You should have thought of that before I said evenly, before you gambled with people's money. I didn't gamble, he protested quickly. You lied, Brian, I said sharper this time. You lied to investors. You lied to Mom and Dad, and now you're asking me to clean it up again. His voice cracked. I'm your brother. I know, I said quietly, my eyes on the small dresser in the loft where I had neatly folded the same 3 sweaters. And that's the saddest part. You're really going to let me go to jail? I'm not letting you do anything I told him. You made choices. I'm making mine. There was a pause, then a whisper. Jesus, Claire, you used to care. I did, I answered. So much that I nearly emptied myself trying to fix everyone else's mistakes, and now I care enough to stop. The line stretched in silence until he spoke again, his voice raw. Please, I'm begging you. I looked out the window at the row of trees swaying outside in the evening air. No one knew where I was, and for the first time, that thought didn't scare me. I already told you, I said softly. Don't beg me. Beg someone else. And I ended the call. This time I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I felt a stillness I hadn't known in years. The next days passed with a calm routine work at the co-working space evenings, in a quiet apartment that smelled faintly of new paint and old wood. My phone stayed silent, and I let it. But the quiet didn't last. A week later, as I packed my laptop to leave the co-working office, the receptionist called my name over the intercom. Someone from legal was waiting for me. My stomach dropped, though part of me had already expected it. A man handed me an envelope without a word, his pen scratching my signature on a slip before he walked away. Inside was a civil complaint. My parents' names were written at the top, claiming that every dollar I had given over the years had been a loan. They accused me of reneging on agreements, of causing them emotional distress by withholding support. I sat in a small cafe nearby and opened my laptop, scanning the words again. Then I pulled up the contact my former manager had given me months before Carol Kim, an attorney. I emailed her the scanned complaint along with my notes, the spreadsheet from the binder, and copies of bank statements. 10 minutes later, she called. They don't have a case, she said firmly. No contracts, no agreements, nothing in writing. This is harassment, plain and simple. I stayed quiet for a moment. Can we counter? I asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. We could go after them for damages, defamation, even distress. You'd win. The thought pressed at me. Suing my parents felt unthinkable, yet the years of being drained lingered heavily. I don't want their money, I finally said. I just want them gone. Carol's voice softened. Understood. I ended the call and slid the envelope back into my bag. For the first time, I felt something shift again. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about being free. The complaint sat on my desk for days, its manila edges curling under the weight of my coffee cups and late-night work. I read it over and over, but the words no longer shook me. They were harsh, yes, but they were hollow too. It spelled out claims I knew were untrue, money called loans, conversations that had never taken place, accusations that turned generosity into obligation. Every sentence carried a strange finality, as if my parents had signed their names to a truth I had already begun to understand. Carol was steady on the phone. She spoke in clipped phrases, confident in her analysis, reminding me I was not the one who needed to defend myself. "They don't have evidence," she said again during our second call. "You've documented everything. This isn't about contracts. This is about control." Her voice was calm, but it echoed through me like a door closing. I had known it all along, but hearing someone else put it into words shifted something deeper. Each evening I returned to the loft, the suitcase still half packed near the door. The space was bare, but it felt like safety. The walls smelled faintly of new paint, the floor creaked with every step, and the windows let in a soft line of light that made the shadows easier to sit with. I began sorting through the pieces of my life the way I had once sorted receipts carefully, deliberately. Old photographs, birthday cards, souvenirs from trips we had taken together. Some I slipped into a box, others I set aside to leave behind. One picture stopped me longer than the rest. The four of us stood on a stretch of sand, the ocean behind us, and the sun setting low. We were smiling, hair tangled from the wind arms wrapped loosely around each other. I stared at it for a long time, trying to recall what it felt like to be held that way without expectation hanging over me. Eventually, I placed the frame face down in the pile marked for donation. The lawsuit hadn't broken me. If anything, it had cleared the path I had been afraid to step onto. For years, I had told myself I could endure more, that if I just worked harder, saved more, carried a little longer, I could keep everyone steady. But the moment my father said she'll pay everything, the illusion collapsed. They hadn't asked, they had decided, and now the lawsuit was their signature at the bottom of that choice. I spent hours walking the quiet streets near the loft, thinking of what came next. My work at the office had always given me structure, but for the first time, I began to see beyond the job. I wanted something that would stretch past numbers and deadlines, something that might help people who had been made invisible in their own families. The thought lingered each time I opened my laptop at night. It was only an idea, fragile and unfinished, but it was mine. When Brian called again, his voice sounded more frayed than before. He didn't ask about the lawsuit. He went straight to his own fears. I could lose everything, he said. The apartment, my license, maybe even worse. His words circled the same ground he had already covered, as if repeating them might change the outcome. You already knew the risks, I told him quietly. You made those choices. Silence followed, then a long sigh. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't think about me at all, I answered. The line stayed open, but neither of us spoke again. I finally ended the call, sliding the phone into a drawer where it couldn't glow in the dark anymore. The days that followed grew lighter. I finished packing, stripping my old apartment down to clean floors and empty shelves. I labeled boxes, stacked them neatly, and left behind the furniture they had once insisted I buy for family gatherings. With each item removed, I felt space opening in me too. Not a void, but room for something else. Sunday morning arrived with a stillness I hadn't felt in years. I loaded the last box into the car and closed the trunk. Inside, only the suitcase remained waiting by the door like a companion. I turned the key in the lock one last time, leaving the rooms behind without regret. My new apartment was farther away near water that shimmered when the sun caught it right. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, and walls that carried no history. I set the suitcase down and listened. No footsteps echoed above. No voices called my name. No demands waited in the air. Just quiet. For the first night in a long while, I slept without checking my phone. When morning came, I made coffee and opened my laptop. The blank document stared back, the cursor blinking like a metronome. Slowly, I began to type. Words formed into a mission statement for something I hadn't told anyone about yet, a nonprofit that could help people reclaim independence when their families saw them only as providers. I called it Second Ledger. It was small, just an idea on a screen, but it felt like the first step towards something that belonged only to me. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Inside, my mother's words sprawled across the page. She wrote of regret, of never seeing me beyond what I could provide, of hoping one day I might forgive her. The letter trembled in my hands as I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into a drawer, not to hold on to, but not ready to throw away either. I didn't write back. Instead, I stepped onto the balcony, hair still unbrushed, the sun warm on my skin. The air smelled faintly of salt, and for the first time I felt steady. Not angry, not broken, not waiting for another call. Just steady. The lawsuit was still there, a process that would take time, but its weight no longer pressed me down. Carol's voice echoed in my mind. This isn't about contracts. This is about control. And with each day that passed, I felt that control slipping away from them and settling back into my own hands. The first week in the new apartment settled into a rhythm. Each morning I walked to a nearby cafe, sipping coffee as the ocean air carried across the street. Evenings were quiet, filled with unpacked boxes and the steady hum of the refrigerator. The apartment was small, but it was mine. The walls felt bare, yet they held no history, no demands, no echoes of arguments. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without my phone lighting up beside me. The lawsuit still hung over me, but it no longer carried the weight it once had. Carol had already filed her first response, confident in every step she explained to me. They can push, she said on one call, but they don't have ground to stand on. Her steady voice cut through the noise, reminding me that I was not alone in this fight. That reassurance gave me room to breathe, to think of life outside the shadow of my family. Brian called again late one evening, his number lighting up the screen long after dark. I answered, though I already knew the tone I would hear. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his words strained. "You're just leaving?" His voice carried the same disbelief as before, as if the idea of me walking away was still impossible to accept. "I already left," I said evenly. "You just didn't notice." He exhaled sharply, frustration spilling through the line. "I could lose everything, Claire. The apartment, my license, I'll have nothing." "I already have nothing," I told him softly. "No trust, no family, just years of being used." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, his voice came smaller than before. "I'm scared." I closed my eyes, picturing him sitting somewhere alone. "I know," I said, "but fear doesn't excuse what you've done. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't think about me at all," I replied. My words landed flat, not sharp, just final. His sigh carried through, but there was nothing left to add. "Please, Claire, please." His voice cracked at the end, but I didn't answer. "I told you before," I said gently. "Don't beg me. Beg someone else." And I ended the call. No messages followed, no emails arrived in the days after. The silence was its own kind of answer. I turned my focus back to the nonprofit idea that had been forming in my mind. Each night after work, I opened my laptop and typed shaping the mission statement with careful words. Second Ledger would help women reclaim financial independence from families who treated them as wallets instead of daughters. I wrote about boundaries, about dignity, about the right to exist without being drained. The words grew into paragraphs and the paragraphs into a plan. What began as a fragile idea now carried weight on the page. One evening, as the sun sank low and filled the apartment with gold light, I stacked the last of my sweaters into the dresser. The space no longer felt temporary. It was still small, still plain, but it was a place that belonged entirely to me. My phone sat dark on the counter, no longer pulling me back to old obligations. The letter from my mother still rested in the drawer, folded neatly where I had left it. I hadn't opened it again, though the memory of her words lingered. She had written of regret, of never seeing me for more than what I provided, of wishing one day I might forgive. I left it tucked away, not to carry but not to destroy either. It was a reminder of where I had been, not where I was going. The nights were quiet but not empty. I walked the streets near the water, listening to the sound of waves pulling against the shore. Each step felt steadier, as though I was learning to live in a rhythm that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. Carol called midweek to update me. Their attorney hasn't filed anything new, she said. They may try to drag it out, but I don't see it lasting. You're in a strong position. Her words settled over me like a blanket, firm and reassuring. After we hung up, I sat on the balcony with a notebook in my lap, sketching ideas for programs Second Ledger might one day support. Financial literacy workshops, resources for women leaving controlling families, safe accounts that couldn't be touched by others. The vision was still blurry, but it felt alive. The guilt that had once followed me everywhere was gone. I no longer woke in the night with the thought of another emergency I would need to fix. Instead, the mornings began quietly, with coffee and light pouring through the windows, and evenings ended with words written in a document meant for something new. My family still lingered in the background, their lawsuit waiting in legal files, their silence filling the spaces where demands used to be. But for the first time, I felt like I had drawn a line that couldn't be erased. I didn't know what the next weeks would bring, but I knew I wouldn't step backward. The path ahead was uncertain, yet it was mine. And as the days passed, I felt the truth settle more firmly. I had already taken the first act of resistance, and I wasn't going back. The weeks following Brian's last call moved with quiet purpose. I kept my routine steady work walks by the water, evening hours spent outlining Second Ledger. The noise that used to fill my life had dulled. No messages, no demands, no questions about why I wasn't coming home. The lawsuit still existed, tucked away in folders on Carol's desk and in the files I kept for backup, but I didn't carry it in my body anymore. Then late one afternoon, Carol called with a change in tone I hadn't heard from her before. Their attorney reached out, she said. They're asking if you'd be open to settling privately. She paused for a second. No numbers were offered, just a vague mention of avoiding court. I didn't answer right away. The words felt like a shift in ground that had long stood still. They may be starting to realize this won't go how they expected, she added. You've held your ground longer than they thought you would. I leaned back in the chair near the window, the sun warming the side of my face. We're not paying them a dime, I said quietly. We won't, Carol replied, but this is where it turns. That night I sat on the balcony with my notebook flipping through pages of goals and notes. The wind off the water had a chill to it, but I stayed outside steadying myself. The part of me that used to brace for every crisis felt different now. Not immune, but solid. The next morning I received an email from the court clerk's office. A new motion had been filed this time by our side. Carol had followed through with a counterclaim, emotional distress, and attorney's fees backed by the years of records I had kept tucked behind my sink. I read every line of it, eyes moving slowly across the screen. There was no satisfaction in the details, just a kind of confirmation. I hadn't imagined what they'd done. It wasn't overblown or exaggerated. It was simply written down now, made real on paper. That afternoon, I stopped by the small diner near the co-working space. The waitress behind the counter had started recognizing me by name. I sat by the window with a coffee and watched people pass by, wondering how many others carried stories like mine in silence. Families that looked warm from the outside, but asked for more than anyone should be expected to give. Carol called again the following week. We got a response, she said. They're withdrawing the original complaint. No apology, no statement just dropped. I didn't say anything. They're trying to avoid the counterclaim now, she added. But it's already filed. You don't have to retract it unless you want to. I looked around the apartment where the last moving box still sat by the door unopened. Let's leave it for now, I said. I thought you might say that. I ended the call and sat in the quiet. My phone didn't ring. My inbox stayed clear. The people who once filled every corner of my attention had finally gone still. A few days later, a letter arrived, no return address again. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper in my father's handwriting. The lines were straight, like he'd used a ruler to guide him. He didn't ask me to come back or mention the case. He wrote, "We didn't know how to say we needed you until it was too late." Then one last sentence. I see it now. I folded the letter and slid it into the same drawer where my mother's apology already rested. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain. The next morning, I closed the final moving box. Inside were records from the lawsuit letters I didn't need to reread, and copies of the nonprofit's registration forms, now official. I taped it shut and labeled it Done. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the second ledger document, and began outlining the first workshop series. The title I typed at the top of the page was simple, "You Don't Owe Them Everything." Outside, the street was quiet, and the wind off the coast had softened. The apartment no longer felt like something I was hiding in. It felt like something I had claimed. And somewhere in the stillness of that moment, I knew exactly where this story was going next. The decision to let the counterclaim stand didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. It wasn't about forcing anyone to pay, just about making it clear that what they did had consequences. Carol moved forward with the filing, quietly giving them 2 weeks to respond. I didn't check for updates. I trusted that if anything important happened, she would call. Instead, I stayed focused on the early pieces of Second Ledger. The nonprofit had officially been registered, the name listed under a P.O. box, and a small website with a simple homepage. I built it from my kitchen table, using the skills I had once applied to solving other people's emergencies. Now I was building something that didn't require me to shrink to fit inside it. Each morning I returned to the same diner, ordering coffee and eggs from the same server who had learned to bring the creamer without asking. I liked the familiarity of it, the quiet routine. No one there knew my last name. No one asked about my brother. One afternoon I stepped outside just as my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar but local. I almost ignored it, then answered. It was Carol. "They've officially withdrawn from mediation," she said. "No apology, but their side is closing. No further action, no financial claim, and no more contact." I leaned against the bench outside the diner, listening as she continued. "That means they can't reopen the case without starting from scratch. This is over, Claire." I didn't speak right away. Then I asked, "Do we need to take any more steps?" "Only if you want to," she said. "But legally, this door is shut." I thanked her, ended the call, and slipped the phone into my coat pocket. Across the street, a couple walked slowly past a shop window, laughing at something neither of them pointed to. Their pace was unhurried, their shoulders relaxed. I watched them for a moment, then walked back toward the apartment, hands deep in my pockets. That night, I opened the storage box I'd labeled Done. Inside were folders from the lawsuit, 2 unopened envelopes from my brother, and the letters from my parents. I took each item out and laid them on the table. One by one, I slipped them into a plastic envelope and sealed it, then tucked it back into the box. I didn't need to read them again. I just needed to know they were no longer part of my daily life. In the weeks that followed, I received nothing more from any of them. No letters, no calls, no messages from mutual friends. It was as though something had gone still on their end too, like we had all accepted the silence for what it was. I spent more time writing in the evenings, sketching outlines for a workshop series, and budgeting a first-year operations plan. The project was small, but each detail made it more real. One of the pages in my notebook held a list of names, people I had helped in the past, not family, but friends, coworkers, acquaintances who had confided in me. I reached out to 2 of them quietly, asking if they'd be open to joining a pilot program. Both said yes. The work gave me a focus, but the quiet moments still carried weight. I'd sit on the balcony some evenings, coffee in one hand, watching the sun shift against the water. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something close, a kind of breath I hadn't been able to take for a long time. Then one morning another letter came. No stamp. It had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. The handwriting was Brian's. I stood with it in my hand for a long time before opening it. Claire, I don't know what else to say except that I was wrong about everything, about you, about what I expected you to do, about what I thought you owed me. I haven't spoken to Mom or Dad in a while. I think they're still angry, but I don't even know if it's at you or at themselves. I'm looking at jobs in a different field, something small, steady. I need to start over too. I just wanted you to know. There was no signature, just the handwriting trailing off at the bottom like he'd run out of space or didn't know how to end it. I folded the paper and placed it next to the others. Not in the done box this time, just in the desk drawer where I kept business receipts and printouts from the nonprofit site. A new place. Later that day, I went for a walk through the neighborhood, stopping by a thrift store where I found a used desk chair in decent shape. It didn't match anything in my apartment, but it fit my back just right. I carried it home myself, taking 2 breaks on the walk back. Once it was inside, I placed it by the window next to my work table. The sun poured in across the surface of the desk, warming the wood and making the outline of my laptop glow. The inbox had no new messages. The phone stayed quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't brace for the next demand. It was done. Not clean, not neat, but done. The morning after I placed Brian's letter in the drawer, I woke to the sound of gulls passing overhead and light stretching across the ceiling. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not because I was avoiding anything, but because I didn't feel rushed. There was nothing waiting to collapse, no one expecting a reply, no emergencies pressed against the silence. It felt like something had finally settled. I made breakfast slowly, the kind you cook when you're not distracted. Just eggs, toast, and black coffee eaten at the small table near the window. Across the street, a neighbor walked her dog, waving politely when she caught my eye. I waved back. It was a simple exchange, but it grounded me. The sealed envelope marked "Done" still sat at the back of the closet. I didn't need to open it. It had become more symbol than storage, a reminder that closure doesn't always mean resolution. Sometimes it means choosing what you'll no longer carry. I spent the afternoon updating the website for Second Ledger. A few local women had signed up for the first workshop, and one had already reached out asking if she could bring a friend. I said yes without hesitation. There was a feeling I hadn't had in years, usefulness that wasn't tied to guilt. I could help now without hurting myself in the process. A few times that week, I caught myself glancing at the mailbox or checking my phone out of habit. But nothing came. No calls, no new letters. Not from Brian, not from my parents. I thought I might feel something when the silence held, but all I felt was space. Room to keep building a life that belonged to me. I still thought of them. I think a part of me always will. The difference now is that I don't feel the pull to return. I can acknowledge what happened without needing to fix it. That's what Second Ledger is really about. Not just finances, but the invisible debt we carry when love comes with conditions. If I've learned anything, it's that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors we get to choose to open or close. Mine stayed open far longer than they should have, but when I finally stepped through and closed it behind me, I found something I didn't expect. Peace. So if you're still listening and you've ever felt like someone only kept you close for what you could offer, just know you're not alone. It's okay to walk away from people who only see your value in terms of what you give. It's not unkind, it's honest. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through or something you've learned, feel free to share it in the comments. And if you haven't already, you're welcome to subscribe for more stories like this one. Take good care of yourself.